You actually only need 5 single-family rentals to replace a 6-figure salary by taking advantage of something I call the wealth hierarchy. Let me show you the wealth hierarchy on the whiteboard. Did you know that there are actually 3 types of returns on investment, and each of them has a different level of importance or hierarchy? You may already be familiar with ROI, which is return on monetary investment, represented by the dollar bill right here. Everyone focuses on this one, but it's actually the lowest on our hierarchy. There are 2 much more important returns on investment, which we will talk about. Let's talk about the top one on here, which is ROTI, represented by the clock here. This stands for return on time invested and is arguably the most important one. This means for every minute that you put into your business, you get back X amount of money. For example, let's say you make $50,000 a year in your real estate business, but it takes you 40 hours a week to do. Then your ROTI is relatively low because this is essentially a full-time job for you. However, let's say you make the same $50,000 a year, but you only put in 4 hours a week instead into your real estate business. That means your ROTI is 10 times greater because it only costs you 4 hours a week of your time versus 40 hours a week of your time. Now, ROTI is the highest one on the hierarchy for a reason. That's because time is your greatest asset. Time is something you can never get back. Once a second passes, that second is gone forever. Think about it this way. If I asked a 60-year-old billionaire if they would trade in all of their money just to become 20 years old again, most of them would say they would do it in a heartbeat. This just highlights how important your time in ROTI is. Now, let's talk about the second most important return on the wealth hierarchy, which is your ROE. ROE stands for return on energy invested, represented by the battery right here. After time, the second most important asset in your life is your energy or your health. After all, if you have to stress out so much that you're always tired in your real estate business, that it shortens your lifespan and ruins your health, then that business is not worth investing in because your ROE is so low. You're spending so much energy for very little return. Now, I say that health is your second most important asset because you could potentially get it back, like if you exercise more, go on a diet, etc. However, there's typically a point of no return, where if you neglect your health too long and use up all of your energy, past the breaking point, it can end up being permanently damaging. I'll give you an example. When I worked as a pharmacist at a hospital, I worked a lot of overtime. I would put in these 16-hour shifts, and then I would make a lot of money, but it would stress me out tremendously. I also had a micromanaging boss who did petty things like tell me that he can track whenever I scan my badge to see where I'm at and what computers that I'm logging into, even though that I was doing my job. That constant feeling of having somebody look over your shoulder for 40 hours a week plus the overtime I was working was enough to cause me to develop a severe stomach disorder. I remember laying on a hospital bed after an endoscopy thinking that no amount of money is worth sacrificing my health. And if I could, I'd trade in all of my properties just to be back in perfect health. I even started crying as a grown-ass man, mind you, when the gastroenterologist told me that my disease was permanent and now chronic. I was diagnosed with IBS, which was very severe at the time given that I had no medication to control it. It was severe enough that I couldn't sleep for several nights in a row, causing me to have hallucinations. And that's when I understood the real value of ROE. Luckily, I found a medication that really controlled the disease, but I still have to live with the disease for the rest of my life. Now, the final return on the wealth hierarchy is ROI, which we talked about earlier is your return on money investment, represented by the dollar bill here. Even though everyone focuses on ROI, it is arguably the least important and the least valuable because you can always make your money back. However, you can't always get back your health, and you definitely cannot get back your time or go back in time. So to build a true freedom real estate business, which is what I teach in my coaching program, you really need to maximize your ROTI and your ROE. These are the creators of true wealth, and that's why they are at the top of the hierarchy. So how do we do this? Well, you need a strategy that maximizes the amount of cash flow you get per rental. In other words, you need a high margins real estate strategy. This does two things for you. One, it allows you to afford to hire a team, as you can see on this diagram. High margins means more cash flow per rental, which leads to being able to afford more delegation to your team, which leads to less time investment for you as you scale. AKA, you increase your ROTI. Basically, you don't have to be the one managing the day-to-day operations of your rental business anymore. Two, it saves you energy and stress, otherwise known as your ROE. You don't have to be the one driving over to your rental at midnight to fix a broken toilet because you have the cash flow to hire a plumber to do that for you. And that, of course, saves you a lot of energy. Having rentals with high margins also allows you to make a six-figure income with having fewer properties. Having a fewer number of properties leads to less total maintenance, and less total maintenance ultimately leads you to maximize your ROTI and your ROE. So how do you define a high margin real estate strategy? Well, any real estate strategy that multiplies your money by 2 or more counts as a high margin real estate strategy. So for every $1 that you put in, you should be getting $2 or $3 out. Now, what happens if you have a low margin strategy? Well, having a low margin strategy means you need more properties in order to hit a six-figure income. Let me demonstrate why this is a huge problem for you as a new investor. Let's say you use a low margin strategy that makes only $200 per month in net cash flow. Well, in order to make $10,000 a month, which is a six-figure income, you need to then have 50 houses. 50 houses times $200 a month per house is $10,000. As you can see on the whiteboard, 50 houses means you have 50 roofs, 50 HVACs, and 50 sewage line systems that can break down on you that you will have to replace. Obviously, each one of these costs a lot of money, most of them $10,000 or more. Now imagine you use a high margin strategy instead, where you only need 5 houses to make $10,000 a month. Well, now you only have 5 roofs, 5 HVACs, and 5 sewage lines that you'll need to replace over the lifespan of those homes. That's why I'd rather have 5 houses making $10,000 a month versus having 50 houses making $10,000 a month. Because having 50 houses is a full-time job versus if I only have 5 houses with high margins as a small-time landlord, that's so much simpler and much less of a time investment. Now, having fewer properties doesn't necessarily mean that nothing ever breaks down and there's no maintenance. In fact, I lost over $30,000 on the very first house that I bought. So I got a call from my tenant at 11 p.m. at night. He was freaking out and telling me that there was poop that was spewing out of the kitchen sink all over the kitchen floor, and it was backing out into the showers as well. And when I hired a plumber that stuck a camera down that sewage line, he found out the whole line was broken, which cost me $9,000 to replace. Not only that, but the house had no AC, so I had to put in a mini split system, which ended up costing me $15,000. I also have pest issues, and overall, that house cost me over $30,000 in the first year of owning it alone. And that was really the moment when I realized that having 50 of these so-called assets wouldn't make me rich. They would just make me a janitor because I would be spending all day cleaning up the messes at my rentals. Imagine if I was dealing with 50 of these issues all on my own. That would be nearly impossible. Plus, I would have to have a humongous maintenance team to take care of all of that and wouldn't be able to afford it. Instead, with just 5 really high cash flowing rentals, it becomes infinitely more manageable for you. Okay, right now you might be wondering, great, I'm sold on maximizing my ROTI and my ROE by using a high margin real estate investing strategy. But does such a strategy exist in today's real estate market in 2026? Well, let me show you one. The strategy is called Rent by the Room Student Housing, which I use to build a multiple six-figure portfolio and retire from my pharmacist job at the age of 31. This strategy maximizes your cash flow by, and this is key, optimizing the space at your rental. Basically, normal landlords rent out the box, but I rent out the space inside the box. What this does for you is something that I call risk reversal. Think about it. If one tenant stops paying you, but you have 6 bedrooms with 6 tenants, then you still make 5/6 of your rental income. Versus if you rent out your whole house to a single tenant and that tenant stops paying, you get 0 income and have to pay the entire mortgage out of your pocket. That's why Rent by the Room student housing reverses your risk. Risk reversal means that you're not all or nothing on a single tenant and that your income is diversified. You're also tapping into a much larger rental pool because there are more people who can afford a room for rent versus the number of people who can afford to rent a whole house. And when you combine high margins with risk reversal, you build an asset that is superior in every layer of the wealth hierarchy that we talked about. Let me go ahead and walk you briefly through the math on a Rent by the Room house so you can know what to expect. This is what a typical one of my student rentals would look like. I would buy a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom house nearby a top college, usually in the $250,000 to $350,000 purchase price range. And then I would add enough bedrooms to get it to 6 or even 7 bedrooms. That same house, I will charge $700 per bedroom per month. And so $700 per month times 6 bedrooms is $4,200 per month for a 6-bedroom house. With a typical mortgage on a $300,000 house of $2,200 per month, including taxes and insurance, this means your cash flow will be roughly $2,000 a month, with a range of maybe $1,500 per month to $2,500 per month after all expenses. And if each of these properties makes about $2,000 a month in cash flow after you increase the rents, then that means that 5 of these houses times $2,000 a month per house would mean you make $10,000 a month in total income, which effectively replaces your salary and gives you financial freedom. Now, of course, listening to the strategy is one thing. Seeing how I executed it step by step from the very first deal to the day that I quit my job is another thing. If you want to see the full story, including how I bought my first deal to the moment I handed in my resignation letter, then you should click on the video up here. Go ahead and click up here, and I'll see you in that video.